Hi everyone, it's 100+ degrees today in south central Washington. It's the perfect backdrop to sit by the water and start our series on bushcraft and traditional fishing techniques. Now there's a lot of food out there in the water, whether you're using a line or a net or a trap. We want to be able to access that resource. So let's start today with talking about using a net. And before we use a net, we need to make a netting needle. This is an example of a netting needle that I made for our last Wild Foods course. And I made this one out of a piece of rosewood. You can get thin pieces of rosewood like this from stores that sell instrument making supplies for guitars, violins, things like that. You could buy a netting needle, of course, at a marine supply store, but I think it's fun to make them. It's a great skill to have, and it's a fun little carving project. Because you'll likely split the first couple of these netting needles that you try to carve, we tell our students to pick up some of these paint stirrers from a hardware store. They're nice and thin, they're easy to carve, nice soft wood, and if you split it, it's not a big deal. You didn't spend a whole bunch of time thinning out a big raw material like you might have to do in the woods. Once I have a section of whatever material I'm going to use, the first step I like to do is to point the end. And I'm going to use a chest lever grip and simply point the end. The next step is to carve the back end, and for this you'll want the tip of your knife. I've already started on this part, and you're just going to do a scooping motion like this. It's important to keep a nice sharp knife for this project. Once you're happy with that, you can scallop all the ends so that the string doesn't catch on it. And then you could see here I have outlined approximately where I want to cut the windows out of my netting needle, so now I can get to work on the final shaping. Just about ready to put some string on this needle, just a little bit more final shaping, but I hope you can see the importance of having a knife that you can get to the tip of easily. This is why I'm an advocate of smaller knives. This is my MBK. It's 4 inches. That's the maximum that I use. Our Celilos are 3.5 inches, and this is a perfect example why. You want to be able to get the tip of the knife involved in projects like this. If you had a very large knife, I suppose it's possible to do something like this, but it would be a lot more difficult, and it's a lot more dangerous when you have a larger knife. So something to consider when you choose a knife. So my needle is done. I'm going to wrap it up with some string now, and the string that I like to use for practicing how to make nets and what we use at our courses is just some simple cotton. I think it's called tatting string. It's easy to see, it's biodegradable, you don't have to use monofilament line or anything nylon like that, and very inexpensive. So to wrap up your needle, you don't have to tie a knot or anything. I just run a line through like so, and then cross over. First I'll make it a little bit shorter like that. Cross over just to hold it in, and then you do this motion to wrap your line. Now I'll show it a little bit clearer here. So I'm going around the post to the side, turn it over around the post to the side. Yeah, turn it over around the post and to the side. Now I made my needle as smooth as I could. I don't have sandpaper obviously, so I took my knife and I really beveled any flat surface. There's nothing sticking out that's going to grab onto my line. And the one that I carry in my survival kit is a small rosewood one like I showed you earlier. And I have a whole bunch of monofilament line wrapped around there. And that's how I store it and carry it with me in my survival kit. And that way, if I am just going to use fishing line just for angling technique, it's right there, it's easy to get to, it's not all twisted up. So our netting needle works with a gauge, and the gauge keeps your net spaces exactly the same, makes things easy to tie. And how this works is I put the line in front of the gauge, and now I'm going to take my netting needle and I'm going to go in between the gauge and my float line, like so, and I'm going to pass the needle underneath that float line between the gauge towards me, and I'm going to pull that, take the slack out of it so that it's tight on the gauge. And then I'm going to simply take my needle and just go underneath the float line again towards me, and what that's going to do is put a clove hitch in the line. Okay, so back to the stitch. In front of my gauge, and I go through that mesh, as they call it, forms a little V, if you can see that. Now, what I do is I'm going to throw a loop over my left hand. I have my needle in my right hand, throwing this over, and what I do is go behind that V and then through that loop that I made, and then I'm going to holding this between my thumb and first finger, I'm going to pull it tight so that I keep that space exactly the same, and then I'm going to repeat. So again, through the loop towards me, pull it tight, throw a loop over my left hand, go behind the V, through the loop, and pull tight. Now I've gone all the way right to left that I can go on my small demo net here, so I'm going to go left to right, and it's exactly the same. Spacer in front, up through the mesh, pull it tight to take out the slack, throw a loop over my left thumb, go behind that V, and pull it tight. And just keep working your way across. Now you're going to see some people do this without spreading the net out across the float line first. And that's fine if you want to do it really compact that way. I think it's easier to show you how to do it when you can see the actual net being formed. But you know, if it's easier for you to do it that way, then go right ahead. So I did enough stitching here so that you could actually see it forming a net. On the bottom of this you would put some type of a weighted line or weights that would keep the net down. And again, you're just going to keep doing that stitch back and forth like a sewing machine until you have the depth that you're looking for, creating sheet bends each time. That's what that stitch creates. So one thing I'm asked at our workshops when I'm teaching this skill is, you know, Mike, why should I learn how to tie a net when I can't use it? You know, I'm not a commercial fisherman. I can't use nets. I don't have tribal rights, etc. And you know, my answer is that it's a wonderful way to connect to these skills of the past. I just really enjoy the process of learning these things. It can come in handy in an emergency. Fishing is again an active thing in the same way hunting is, where using a net is sort of a passive way, the same way trapping is, right? Your nets are working when you're doing other things. So if you are really stuck in a survival situation, then a net is really the way to go. Hope you enjoyed this video. Give this a try. It's a really fun project, and stitching those nets is a great little zen sort of state of mind to get into. Next time we're going to look at angling techniques. We're going to make traditional fish hooks and line and take it to the lake and give it a try. So see you next time.